The claim that Captain Ibrahim Traoré was given just 48 hours to hand over 60% of Burkina Faso's gold and oil is not based on fact, but has gone viral online as a symbol of Africa's long struggle against foreign exploitation. While no such ultimatum was ever issued by Donald Trump or the US, the story reflects a deeper truth many Africans feel, that for decades their natural resources have been controlled by outside powers. In reality, Traoré has openly defied Western influence, expelled French troops, tightened control over gold mining, and aligned Burkina Faso with other Sahel nations in a bid to reclaim sovereignty. The 48-hour ultimatum may be myth, but it captures the spirit of defiance that now defines his leadership. Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso has become a lightning rod for debates about sovereignty, resistance, and Africa's quest to reclaim its wealth from centuries of exploitation. In recent months, one headline in particular captured global attention and circulated rapidly across social media platforms. Traoré defies Trump's demand for 60% of Burkina Faso's gold and oil, Africa's boldest rejection yet. The claim was dramatic, suggesting that the young Burkinabe leader had stared down a powerful Western figure and refused to surrender his nation's resources. Shared across Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and WhatsApp, it spread like wildfire and ignited passionate discussions across the continent and beyond. For many, the headline symbolized a long-awaited act of defiance, proof that Africa could finally say no to Western plunder. Yet when examined more closely, the claim falls apart. There is no credible evidence that Donald Trump ever demanded 60% of Burkina Faso's gold or oil. No reputable media outlet, no diplomatic record,
Sources
no
say the
economic
cable didn't just
negotiation,
show up.
and no
It was
government statement
hand-delivered by a
backs such a
trusted
story.
go-between,
And yet,
a former
the
US
popularity
military
of the claim
attaché,
tells us something
flanked
far
by
more
private
revealing than
American
the headline
security
itself.
contractors.
It shows how
landed on
deeply
Captain Ibrahim
Africans yearn for
Traoré's
sovereignty,
desk at dawn.
how powerful
The
Ibrahim
message?
Traoré's
Crystal clear.
symbolic defiance has become, and how myths and realities intertwine in the struggle against exploitation. To understand why this narrative took root, it is important to step back and look at who Ibrahim Traoré is, what Burkina Faso represents, and how the country has become a stage for broader battles between Africa and Western powers. In September 2022, Traoré, then just 34 years old, emerged from relative obscurity as a captain in the army to seize power in a military coup. His target was another coup leader, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who had taken control just months earlier. But where Damiba had promised reforms and then faltered, Traoré appeared bolder, younger, and more willing to confront not only internal enemies, but external powers. His rise came at a time when Burkina Faso, like much of the Sahel, was under siege from jihadist insurgencies, which had displaced millions and destabilized entire regions. But the crisis was not only military, it was also economic and political. For decades, Burkina Faso had been one of Africa's top gold producers, yet its people saw little benefit. Foreign mining companies dominated the sector, reaping billions in profits while the state collected modest royalties. Ordinary Burkinabe watched as their land yielded treasure that enriched others while they remained poor. Traoré tapped into this frustration. Almost immediately after assuming power, Traoré adopted the language of sovereignty and resistance. He compared himself to Thomas Sankara, the legendary Pan-Africanist who once renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. Like Sankara, Traoré spoke of dignity, independence, and the need to resist imperialist domination. His speeches emphasized that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to Western dictates, whether from France, the United States, or multinational corporations. He declared that the nation's resources would be reclaimed for its people and that partnerships with foreign actors would be restructured to serve Burkinabe interests first. This rhetoric was not just words. In 2025, his government moved decisively to nationalize industrial gold mines. Companies like Endeavour Mining, which had long dominated Burkina Faso's production, suddenly found their operations transferred to a state-controlled company, Sopamib. Alongside this, Traoré announced plans to construct a national gold refinery so that Burkina Faso would no longer export raw ore but refine its gold at home, capturing more value within the national economy. These steps were dramatic, and they represented a clear rejection of the neoliberal orthodoxy that had long guided African economies, where privatization and foreign investment were encouraged at the expense of state control. Instead, Traore embraced resource nationalism. It was against this backdrop of real defiance that the myth of Trump's 60% demand began to circulate. The story fit perfectly into the narrative already forming around Traore. Social media users imagined the archetypal Western strongman, Trump, demanding Africa's wealth, and the archetypal African resistor, Traore, standing firm. The fact that no such event ever happened seemed almost irrelevant to those who shared the story. For them, it expressed a deeper truth. For generations, African resources have indeed been demanded, seized, and extracted by Western powers. The details may have been fabricated, but the emotional truth resonated. It was not Trump specifically who mattered, but what he represented, a symbol of Western greed and arrogance. In rejecting him, Traore symbolically rejected centuries of exploitation. The myth also resonated because Traore's real policies have indeed defied the West in unprecedented ways. One of his earliest moves was to expel French troops from Burkina Faso. France had maintained a military presence in the country for over a decade, claiming to assist in the fight against terrorism. But many Burkinabés saw their presence as useless at best and exploitative at worst. Traore accused France of pursuing its own strategic interests rather than genuinely helping his people. The expulsion was not only symbolic, but strategic. It severed ties with a former colonial power and aligned Burkina Faso with a broader Sahel-wide rejection of French influence. Mali and Niger, too, had already turned against France, expelling troops and rethinking alliances. Together, the three countries announced their withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, claiming the bloc was serving Western agendas. In its place, they created the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a regional coalition meant to strengthen their autonomy. This bold move shocked the continent and alarmed Western diplomats, but it thrilled citizens who longed for self-determination. Traore also sought new partners. As France departed, Russia entered. Military cooperation deals were signed, Russian advisors arrived, and a new alliance began to take shape. Traore emphasized that Burkina Faso would not depend exclusively on Russia, but would diversify its partnerships. Still, the symbolism was powerful, a shift away from the West toward alternative powers. For critics, this was merely swapping one dependency for another. For supporters, it was evidence of a new geopolitical courage. In the eyes of ordinary Burkinabé, this defiance was long overdue. The people had watched their gold flow abroad for decades, their security worsened despite Western intervention, and their dignity eroded by outside influence. Traore's nationalism gave them pride. The viral Trump story must therefore be seen in this context. It was less a journalistic claim and more a folk narrative. People wanted to believe that an African leader had finally told a Western president no. Trump was a convenient figure for this tale. Known for his blunt, transactional style, he fit the image of someone who would casually demand another nation's resources. Traore, young and defiant, was the perfect hero to stand against him. The story spread not because it was true, but because it felt true. It tapped into deep historical wounds and contemporary frustrations. Of course, the challenges ahead for Traore are immense. Nationalizing mines is one thing, managing them efficiently and transparently is another. Critics warn that state-run enterprises in Africa often succumb to corruption and inefficiency. Without skilled management, the mines could underperform and promised benefits may fail to materialize. Investors may withdraw, leaving Burkina Faso isolated. At the same time, security continues to deteriorate in parts of the country, with jihadist groups carrying out attacks and displacing civilians. Traore insists that his strategy of sovereignty will strengthen Burkina Faso's resilience, but it is a gamble. His reliance on Russia, too, raises concerns. If Burkina Faso replaces dependency on the West with dependency on Moscow, has it truly achieved sovereignty? These are questions that will shape the future. Yet for now, Traore remains a powerful symbol of resistance. Across Africa, citizens in other countries look to him as proof that it is possible to defy the West. In Mali, Niger, and beyond, leaders have taken similar stances, forming a new wave of resource nationalism and anti-imperialist rhetoric. Even in countries not ruled by military juntas, governments are beginning to renegotiate contracts with foreign companies to secure better terms. A continental trend is emerging, one that echoes the 1960s era of independence, but with a new focus on economic sovereignty. In this light, the myth of Trump's 60% demand becomes part of a larger narrative of awakening. The story of Traore rejecting Trump's alleged demand may not be true in a factual sense, but in a symbolic sense it captures the mood of the moment. It reflects a profound hunger for dignity, independence, and control. It highlights the frustration with centuries of exploitation and the yearning for leaders who will resist. Whether Traore succeeds in delivering real change remains to be seen. His policies carry risks as well as promises. But his symbolic defiance has already reshaped the political imagination of Africa. The myth of Trump's demand, though false, endures because it tells a story people need to hear, that Africa is finally standing up, finally rejecting exploitation, and finally asserting its right to its own wealth. The deeper truth is that the era of silent submission is ending, and a new era of defiance and self-determination is beginning. The deeper truth, then, is not in whether Trump actually asked for Burkina Faso's gold or oil, but in why so many were willing to believe he did. The viral story became a parable, a piece of modern folklore in the digital age. It was retweeted, reshared, and reenacted in short TikTok skits where young Africans portrayed Traore boldly rejecting an imagined Trump emissary. In WhatsApp groups across West Africa, uncles and aunties forwarded it with pride, saying, "Finally, we have a leader with backbone." The myth gained traction not because it was substantiated, but because it touched the collective nerve of a continent tired of being plundered. To dismiss it simply as fake news would be to miss the point. It was less a falsehood and more a metaphor. And in Africa's long struggle for sovereignty, metaphors can be just as powerful as facts. To appreciate why this symbolism resonates so deeply, one must revisit the long history of resource exploitation in Burkina Faso and West Africa as a whole. Gold has been dug from the soil of the Sahel for centuries, carried by camel caravans across the Sahara long before colonialism. The legendary ruler Mansa Musa of Mali, often cited as the richest man in history, built his wealth on these same deposits. Yet the colonial encounter reshaped the dynamics completely. Under French rule, Upper Volta, as Burkina Faso was then known, was systematically underdeveloped, its labor extracted for railways and plantations while its resources were siphoned to enrich Paris. Independence in 1960 did not end this pattern. France maintained economic dominance through the CFA franc system, which tethered Burkina Faso's currency to the French treasury, limiting its monetary sovereignty. Meanwhile, multinational corporations expanded mining operations, exporting raw gold with minimal benefit to the local population. This created a structural dependency that became almost invisible, normalized through contracts and policies that seemed technical but were deeply political. When Traore rails against imperialism, he is not inventing grievances. He is channeling a long history of frustration. The comparison to Thomas Sankara is not accidental. Sankara, who ruled from 1983 to 1987 before being assassinated, remains a towering figure in Africa's political imagination. He was a soldier, a revolutionary, and a visionary who sought to break the chains of neo-colonialism. Sankara refused aid that came with strings attached, promoted food self-sufficiency, denounced debt as a tool of domination, and famously declared that "he who feeds you, controls you." His bold reforms, from banning female genital mutilation to planting millions of trees against desertification, won him admirers across Africa. But his challenge to foreign interests also earned him powerful enemies, and many still believe his assassination was orchestrated with French complicity. When Traore invokes Sankara's name, he is deliberately situating himself in that lineage of defiance. For young Africans who never knew Sankara in life, but grew up on YouTube clips of his speeches, Traore feels like a reincarnation of that spirit. The Trump story, then, becomes part of this mythology. Sankara once resisted France. Traore now resists America. In practice, Traore's government has taken concrete steps that few African leaders have dared to attempt in the neoliberal era. The nationalization of gold mines was not mere rhetoric. The creation of SOPAMIB, Société pour le Patrimoine Minier du Burkina, marked a decisive break with decades of foreign-dominated extraction. Plans for a national refinery underscore his determination to keep value-added processes within the country. Beyond gold, his administration has hinted at reclaiming control over manganese and phosphate reserves. Simultaneously, agricultural reforms have been announced, seeking to reduce dependence on imported food and fertilizers. These moves signal a comprehensive vision, resource sovereignty not just in mining but across the economy. Of course, skeptics warn that state management can be inefficient and prone to elite capture. But even critics concede that Traore has tapped into a popular yearning for dignity and control that privatization never delivered. The regional impact has been profound. In Mali and Niger, fellow junta leaders have echoed his rhetoric and deepened their alliance through the AES. Their withdrawal from ECOWAS shocked many, as it represented not just a political realignment, but a challenge to the post-colonial order itself. ECOWAS, often criticized as a tool of Western influence, suddenly looked fragile. The AES leaders framed their exit as liberation, a refusal to be dictated to by Abuja or Paris. Across the continent, citizens in Ghana, Senegal, and even South Africa began asking whether their own leaders were too submissive to foreign powers. The ripple effect of Traore's defiance thus extends beyond Burkina Faso's borders. It has become a continental conversation about sovereignty. The myth of Trump's 60% demand spread so widely because it was not just a Burkinabe story, but an African story. It dramatized what millions from Dakar to Dar es Salaam feel in their bones, that the wealth of Africa belongs to Africans, not outsiders. Yet the challenges Traore faces are immense and cannot be glossed over. Jihadist insurgencies continue to threaten large swathes of the country, displacing families and undermining economic life. Without security, even the boldest economic reforms may falter. Moreover, running state-owned enterprises demands technical expertise and transparency, qualities that African governments often struggle to maintain. If corruption creeps into SOPAMIB, the promise of nationalization could turn into disappointment. Likewise, the pivot toward Russia carries risks. Moscow may provide weapons and advisors, but it has its own interests and will likely seek concessions in return. Critics caution that replacing French imperialism with Russian dependency is not true sovereignty. Traore himself insists that Burkina Faso will diversify partnerships, seeking ties with Turkey, China, and even fellow African nations, but the balance will be delicate. Still, for now, the symbolism outweighs the uncertainties. In the minds of many Africans, Traore embodies a rebirth of resistance. Social media has amplified this perception, turning him into a kind of digital-age Sankara. Memes depict him as a lion guarding gold from foreign predators. Songs and poems celebrate his courage. Hashtags like #TraoreResistance trend alongside calls for African unity. In this sense, the viral Trump story is not a lie but a cultural text, a digital folktale in which the details are secondary to the message. That message is clear. Africa will no longer bow. And so the saga continues. Whether Traore ultimately succeeds or fails in his policies, he has already shifted the narrative. He has shown that it is possible for an African leader to expel foreign troops, nationalize resources, and survive politically, at least for now. He has reminded the world that the Sahel is not just a zone of crisis, but also a crucible of new ideas about sovereignty. And he has given voice to the anger and aspirations of millions who have waited too long for leaders who stand tall. In that sense, the myth of Trump's 60% demand will endure, not as journalism but as legend, a parable of resistance in an age of digital storytelling. The claim that Captain Ibrahim Traoré was given just 48 hours to hand over 60% of Burkina Faso's gold and oil is not based on fact, but has gone viral online as a symbol of Africa's long struggle against foreign exploitation. While no such ultimatum was ever issued by Donald Trump or the US, the story reflects a deeper truth many Africans feel, that for decades their natural resources have been controlled by outside powers. In reality, Traoré has openly defied Western influence, expelled French troops, tightened control over gold mining, and aligned Burkina Faso with other Sahel nations in a bid to reclaim sovereignty. The 48-hour ultimatum may be myth, but it captures the spirit of defiance that now defines his leadership.